Hi, this is Bryant with Slam, and on this week's Slam Present, I speak with Allison McGree, painter from Montana who grew up in Helena and had a big influence in Butte, and I think that's a great place to start. So what was your Butte influence?
My grandmother. So my family, if you are or if you're in Butte right now, you definitely know the McGrees. There's a huge family. My dad's one of 9 siblings, and his mother was an artist. So we spend a lot of time there. We have a really, really close, tight-knit family. The other side as well, both sides are very tight-knit, but my Butte grandmother is kind of my spirit human.
And she really helped push you to live a life full of art.
She pushed me to live a life full of me. Art absolutely, and we connected in the visual world, talking about paintings and talking about sunsets and rainbows and how to paint things and different techniques. But she was really good at focusing on and knowing who they were at their core and celebrating that. So I think that in a family of a couple hundred, I feel like we all have some degree of thinking that we might be her favorite. She really...
That was her gift. No matter who she spoke with, you felt that she was really speaking just to you.
Absolutely.
How do you think she knew that you were an artist?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. So we do a family vacation every year. We go to the lake for a week, and she would bring her art supplies, and I would be around at that point, probably 50 or so, one of the 50 younger grandkids, and she would bring the cheap art supplies out, and as soon as the sun came out warm enough for people to jump and play in the lake, most 99 actually, I think I was the remaining one. So everybody else would go play, and then my grandma would slowly start to show me her real paints. And she had real watercolor paints and real watercolor paper. And so I would from my earliest ages, wait out the rest of the kids and wait to be able to paint with her.
What an important lesson. It's like you only get deeper in stuff by putting in the effort. Even just by showing up and being there. As long as you're invested, things will start to grow and you'll start to discover the deeper secrets.
Mm-hmm. And see, I think one of the strengths of artists is the ability to stare at things for a long time and try to start to understand them. So when you're talking to someone who's an artist, it makes sense to say, I've been staring at these birds for a week, and I've been doing little sketches of those birds. Did you notice that there's a blue hint to the back, or whatever that kind of thing is? We had that language that we would always talk in.
So as an artist, you had a sharper eye,
mm-hmm.
and you got to notice details early on in life, and that's something that was able to develop over time.
Yeah.
So as every kid ran off to go jump in the lake, did you just sit there and start doing a plein air, starting to capture any of the memories?
I do. I wish I had all of those. I remember... Yeah, we would definitely do a lot of watercolors. Obviously, just the lake and the sunset and blue skies and things. She would show me clouds. I remember her using salt for the first time, and to show me how to do raindrops or snow or something like that. So it was always just a mini art lesson.
So it started off as a hobby, just something you picked up and you connected with your grandmother over, and you're doing it as a passion. How did your art career evolve, and how did you go from hobby to profession?
Yeah, that's great. I didn't mean to, is the short of it. So I went to Gonzaga University and wanted to work in an embassy. So I went into majoring in Spanish and international relations, and I thought I would, live in Brazil or go to Costa Rica or all of these great grand ideas and traveling the world.
To the warm weather.
Yeah. I love experiencing different cultures and different people, and I feel like language is such a cool way to understand other people. But at Gonzaga, you take a test, and a pretty heavy test of what else are you interested in, and there are a lot of prereqs to get into any class. So I scored really high in philosophy, but I scored extremely high in the arts. So I was put in a bunch of different art classes, and then once I I still remember my very first oil painting class in a studio, and it was game changing. I had an easel, I had a little cubby, I could go whenever I wanted and paint, and the smell of oil paint is still something I absolutely love. But the study of images in color is something that I have never fallen out of love with. It's just, if I have to dream about a nose or an eyeball or a shadow and show up at the canvas the next day, that's absolutely perfect. Coincidentally, I had a studio class that was scheduled at the same time that I had a business class, and so I had to choose between the two, and my professor sat me down and said, just give us one semester, be an art major, and I laughed and I was like, well, you can't make a living in the arts, that's ridiculous. So they convinced me though, and from then on I just kept doing what I love, and it's evolved to teach a little bit and paint a lot more and explore.
Well, it's funny. It's like your story as an artist reflects how you paint, but you just trusted the process.
Mm-hmm.
You were born with a grandmother who helped develop this skill, and you just kind of stayed with that, and it started to develop. You went to college, think you're going to do something else. Next thing you know, you happened at the right school that gave you a test that showed you that this is a way, and then still you're a little hesitant, but art kind of chose you.
Mm-hmm. I definitely feel that. I feel like that's the golden thread through it all of as long as and you always know, right? There's always a voice inside of you that says...
A feeling, especially someone so tapped into their emotions.
Yeah. And if I follow that feeling and if I'm true to it, one, I'm happier, and I have started to slowly learn to trust the universe, because that instant feeling of, I would never do that. That seems like I will never make a living or be happy or any of those important structural parts of what you think you need when you're 18 or 20 or whatever, how old I was to be happy.
Allison, what is the name of this painting?
This painting is in process right now, so it does not have a name quite yet. It's the one that is actually on my easel that I'm working on. So the name hasn't come to me quite yet, but there is a link. So early on in COVID, I just put it out to show you a reference, but the calendar right there, I did a COVID-19 lion. And that's how I felt around March, April, kind of more rageous. So I feel connected to this lion image as a part of me. And I guess moving into the new year, I just feel much more contemplative, like more thinking of the future and not as full of fright.
So do the names always come to you at the end, or is it just a painting by painting thing?
Painting by painting, but most of the time, more often than not, it'll come at the end, especially in this style of artwork. When I'm painting something, the Bridgers or a peak or something like that, the name always connects to that place. Well, most of the time connects to that place, but it usually is a feeling while I'm doing it that I reflect on after, where the name comes into it.
Has the name ever come to you first, and then you build the story around the title?
Yeah, actually, so I've done a few paintings when loved ones or friends have passed away, and that, as I'm painting, as I'm working through the process, I'm thinking about that person at the time. So their name or their nickname or pieces of them are part of the painting, but I don't ever have an end result in mind when I'm painting. I show up the canvas and kind of allow the universe to flood through me as much as I possibly can. Not that it always floods beautifully or the first time, but I really try to be present and just allow whatever is out there to come through me.
So as the universe comes through you into your ideas, how much does the canvas pick the painting, or do you think that all comes from you?
How much does the canvas pick up the painting?
No, pick the painting. Because you have a size dimension here, you only have a window that you can show. Do you think it's a give and take between what's coming through you and the canvas, or is this just what the paint goes on?
No, I think it's all of the above. It's in the different pieces of the puzzle. So there's how am I feeling? How do I show up at the canvas? What is my day like? What am I going through? What are the people I love going through? That will show up. And then there are words that I'll listen to. So I'll listen to podcasts, I'll listen to music, and I'll connect with that. And then there's a greater part of that to the equation, that it just feels like if I allow myself to kind of free fall into the paint, then it evolves. I'm the hand, obviously, I'm in the room doing it, but sometimes it feels like I walk away and I'm like, what? A lot of times right now, it's more of I walk away and wonder, what in the world did I just do? I have to sit and look at it and see what happened with the paint.
You're so caught up in the process. You're kind of not seeing the whole forest through the trees in that moment.
Absolutely. You get lost, which is why I have to set my alarm. So I have to set, I get so lost in this flow or whatever state you want to call that, that if I have something that I have to do post-painting, if I have a dinner or something to be at, I need to set my alarm because there's a great chance, unless, especially if the sun is still out. These days, it gets dark and kind of gives me an indication of what time, but I can lose track of the day pretty quickly.
Yeah, especially here in the summer when it gets dark at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
You just
Paint
get
all day.
flowing before you know it.
Yeah.
And I imagine then you also need some time to decompress,
Yep.
to step back out of your own world back into this one.
Yep.
So you said this one is very contemplative, kind of looking up, staring at the moon. Can you describe your creative process?
Yeah, so it has evolved. So the beginning parts of how I learned to be creative was much more realistic. I was taught how to paint, how to mix colors, and how to make something appear exactly like it did in real life. From then, it slowly evolved into now where I am, without throwing all of the, 20, 40 years of process in there. Now what I do is I show up at a canvas, and I treat it like a journal. So I call it a brain dump if I'm teaching it, but essentially what it is whatever I am thinking, or feeling, or if there's a song lyric that's stuck in my head, I will write in and you can kind of see, any direction at all, and I'll cover the entire canvas up with words, and then I'll put all of the colors on my palette, because I don't ever know what color I'm going to grab, I guess. It's not something that I don't mix a whole lot, as you can tell, unless it's on the canvas. So I just start painting and listening to music and going over the top of those words with whatever color shows up on my paintbrush. Most of the time I don't mix my paintbrush in between, so I kind of allow the paint to move around. There are, when I'm really if I'm really thinking heavily about something, I end up being much more circular. If I'm really upset, or if somebody just passed away or something big has happened, then I have a lot more like super energetic brush strokes that I don't necessarily notice while I'm doing them, but having done it plenty of times now, I'm like, I can see that's, like, I had big feelings on that one, or I was much more at ease on that one, or whatever the combination is. After that, so words, color, and then I step away from the canvas, and like these ones around are in that stage. They only have the words and they only have the color. And then I kind of, I guess, just allow myself to be open to what does it look like. And the only way I can really explain that is if you've ever looked at the clouds in the sky and you start to imagine you see things in the clouds.
And they take shape more and more.
Exactly. So I see a raven, or I have a dream about a lion, or I think that circle up there looks a lot like the full moon. And the planets are super interesting to me, and the pull of the planets, always very interesting to me. So
Kind of sounds like a jigsaw puzzle.
it's a complete jigsaw puzzle.
You focus on a big object, start to take shape, and then around it you start to see, and then from there you may understand what's interacting with the moon.
Yep.
So then you start interacting down here, and your line starts to take shape, and then you have to figure out what's the story that gets me from him to there.
Exactly, and then stepping back too, because I've been painting for so long that I also understand lights and darks, and I want it to be three-dimensional. And if somebody looks at this canvas, I want them to look at the whole thing, the entire story of the canvas, and not one little piece. So did I pay as much attention to this side of the canvas than I did to that one? And does it read as finished, or does it read as it needs, another element? And a lot of times it's hard for me to decide when it's finished, but there are plenty of times where I'll grab a canvas right off the wall and paint right over the top of it again, which is tricky on my website because I have to make sure that I update that I repainted on some of those. But it's always in flux. There's nothing that's really completely set.
So the hard part is dismount, knowing when it's time to stop
It's
working
really hard.
on it.
And it takes failing at that, I think, because there are plenty of times when I've done something and then thought, oh my gosh, why did I do that? So it takes forcing myself into a pause state to maybe walk away, or to go on a run, or do something to get out of my head, and then come back with fresh eyes, so that I don't completely, use anxiety and crazy restless energy to ruin a painting. And I also think that anything it's, there's not really a mistake. We were talking earlier, and I firmly believe that no artist really makes a mistake, and I know that has, there's people that believe different sides of that, but what I mean by that is that you can always change your mind. Like, allow that painting to then react to you, and what could you turn it into? It's not a ruined painting with paint, especially acrylic paint. I was trained in oil, but I do a lot more with acrylic right now. But
and that's what this is.
Yeah,
acrylic.
This is acrylic. And it's actually a pourable acrylic, because I like how loose and liquid and flowy it is. But that's, I haven't used that. That's probably the last 2 years or so that I've been playing around with this medium.
Well, I think that's such a valuable lesson, and a valuable lesson to any artist. Don't be so caught up in an end result that something has to be perfect that you're afraid to experiment.
Yeah.
Because there is no failure. You're
and
getting practice, and
too. Yeah.
You're learning to really enjoy the process, and only by maybe failing do you really help discover how your art can move forward and free you. And even you might be stuck on an idea that you can't even finish, but if you get so far, you realize you can move on from that and then kind of restart.
Mm-hmm. And people connect to it too. There's, in that equation of how I create is also the viewer. So there's another whole additional, like, how does somebody come to my canvas? What do they come with? That has nothing really to do with me, but adds into this connectedness of the painting.
And when did you start painting this?
Last week.
Last week. So this is 10 months into a crazy, crazy year, and you feel now, and it's also kind of funny because it's like we're getting near the holidays, we're getting towards the new year,
Mm-hmm.
so you're kind of shifting out of anxiety more into contemplation.
Exactly, which feels good. It's not that there isn't still, there's still lion energy in myself, in my work, but it feels more like there's something to pause and look at.
Do you date your paintings?
I do now. I actually, I put it on the side. I have not always done it unless I'm finished, but now because COVID has been such a crazy time that I'll write the date on one side of the canvas so I can look back and say, oh, that's the day this happened, or that's the, whatever happened in that moment.
Because when you look back at your different paintings, you have a general sense of when you painted that based on the expression and based on what you see?
Oh yeah, and chapters of my life. Like whatever, this is a big chapter. It looks completely different than my time at Gonzaga. It looks completely different than when I was obsessed with the Bridgers. I feel like that's something that is such an important part of human beings and artists being human beings, is that we evolve, right? Hopefully we learn and we grow and we change, and we have to be, or I guess it behooves us to be open to changing and evolving and seeing what the next chapter will be.
Well, it's funny, I work off my emotions, I know you do, but as a writer and not somebody in visual mediums, it's a little bit different. But there's like a memory in emotions.
Yeah.
And you might forget certain things if you're just thinking of something intellectually, and I may kind of forget stuff, but I know it's in my mind, and if I have a trigger that brings me back to that emotion, I could remember that story, or I could remember so much more when I tap into the emotion that kind of cemented that memory in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine you looking back at your own work, you kind of always remember how you felt because you're tapping back into that emotional connection.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I would even add to that, the deepest, darkest, the hardest emotions, one, I admire that in other artists. So whenever I've looked at people's artwork, even if I have no idea what that personal story is, you can feel it, right? You can feel it in music, you can feel it in dance, you can feel it in any kind of performance, any painting. That raw human throw at the canvas feeling is really, really obvious. And if I look at my work, I can go through and say, and times that are hard end up creating some really maybe darker, maybe more chaotic, but it kind of pushes you forward faster, I guess, than when things are just peachy.
Totally. There's a sense of pressure there, and like anger we look at it as a bad thing, but it's also your natural armor. It's like your passion, and it's pouring forth, and your sadness, which is a thing, again, we're afraid to tap into, is such a cathartic emotion, and it's you letting go of so much. So imagine painting for you also just must be such a cathartic way to experience emotions that other people may have a hard time expressing.
Absolutely. Which is why, part of the reason why I teach, or did teach and sometimes teach on Zoom right now, is because I think it's such an important thing for people to take what's inside of them, and whatever way they can, just let it go. And in a very imperfect way. I think that part of the day, when I'm teaching classes, there's always somebody or a couple people that don't want to even try because they don't want to fail. And I feel like the more, you build up the failure muscles, as in the more you get comfortable with the unknown and expecting that you're going to fail, because we're imperfect humans and we should fail.
And you get to express yourself deeper when you get past that. And you talk about the power of those emotions on campus. It's such a genuine thing when you know somebody's being raw and exposed. And that's also something you build up. Where you might not be actually afraid of failure, but you're afraid of letting yourself go. But that's what's causing that bottle up. And if you can just trust that letting this out and being whatever it is can be such a healing thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Saying yes to that universal, question, I think is very important for all of us.
You become more authentic as an artist. This is more of your voice, and the more you're not afraid to put yourself out there, the easier it is of just letting it go.
Exactly.
And that's going to come across more and more as your own unique voice, because it's you.
Yeah. I've been reading a lot about the zone of genius, the what makes you special in a way that is completely different than anybody else, which is hard because we're all so similar in some ways, but focusing on your zone of genius and leaning into things that you are really innately good at or you are comfortable doing, I feel like there's some energy there instead of constantly trying to do things that are more difficult for you or challenging yourself or proving something to some outside source.
You talked about the strokes before, that if you're feeling a little bit more joyful, it's going to be a little bit more circular. If you're feeling heavier, it's quicker and it's sharper. Does that also reflect in your color scheme? Could you look back at your colors and notice how your colors translate with your moods?
Oh, absolutely.
So to you, when you look at it, if you're more joyful, what color is going to come across?
Yellow
your
is
anger?
absolutely. I'm definitely in the color theory. I will hide. I have hid yellow from me. Just to see if I could paint without yellow, and somehow in the middle of that flow I'll grab yellow. So yellow is absolutely sunshine, happy, things are, or glowing or hopeful. But the black and the darker ones, I've definitely painted some really dark storms, and that there's reasons for that. There's some black in my paintings that my college professor didn't want us to ever use black, so in the past couple of years I've embraced just breaking any rule I needed to for my own personal reasons. And using black is great because it's, the contrast. We have such bright yellow and we have such dark black. And sometimes together, they're beautiful. So
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, there's a great lesson in there. It's like, whatever the rules are, they're there sometimes to give you guidelines, but sometimes throw the rules out.
Yeah.
Like if they are inhibiting you from doing something you want, do it. I like to use rules sometimes. People get so caught up in like a creative restraint, thinking it only as a restraint, but sometimes that restriction actually opens up a whole new level of creativity for you because it's like a guideline. It's something that you could go off of, but there comes a point where you just got to be free, in which case, do it.
Yeah.
It's like use rules as a general guideline, but if they don't serve you in that moment, don't be constricted to just that rule. And what I thought was super interesting was you talked about how you hide yellow and it comes out. So I teach dance, and I teach dance around an emotional cycle, and it's like we start with anxiety, go into anger, sadness, joy, compassion. And it's like first you feel, and then once you feel, the first thing that's going to come up is your anger because it's the most intense of your emotions. But your anger is also your inner strength and your fire, and it creates space. That space is sadness, is that void you feel, that emptiness. But if you sit in that uncomfortable feeling long enough, it becomes comfortable and it leads to joy. So if you hid your joy or your sunshine and that yellow from you in the beginning, as you paint this cathartic process and you process your anxiety and your anger and your sadness, what's left and comes out naturally is just that sun peeking out through the clouds.
I love that. That's completely, yes, perfect. And plus, if you're painting, right, you paint dark to light, so that's an interesting cycle to align with. In acrylic and oil paint, I've always been taught to paint the shadows and then build off the shadows. So that's good. Start dark and then end up with joy.
Do you always felt you were emotional and led with your emotions, or is that something that developed, especially once you started taking the steps to becoming a real artist?
I think it might be just who I am. I feel like it's, like I said, I have definitely fought it with logic and with my brain as much as I can.
We all have.
Right? So and it's still a fight, but it's an interesting fight now because now I can see it and I can, think of it as part of me, like, okay, interesting, Allison, that's great, but you don't actually like math, and spreadsheets and sitting in a chair all day long is never going to make you happy. So instead of looking for jobs on the internet, help wanted, I'm going to be a secretary. If that were to make me happy and bring joy to me, fantastic. If that's your calling. But for me, God, if I can't stand up and run around and move my body and make a mess, it's not worth it.
So how did you transition even from there? So went from hobby to you started getting professionally trained. How did you then evolve into this is a life that can sustain me and there's a business aspect to art that I'm starting to conquer?
A lot of work, like personal work. I think meeting that fear, I guess, is something that I still to this day say, well, I'm not, I'm still working to be an artist. I'm just not an artist. And then I flip over and in the middle of a class, I'm convincing a 10-year-old, you're creating art right now. So you're an artist. Like, get over this weird, I don't know, like a beautiful font. Exactly. Like, if you are making something, who cares if it's right or wrong? Just keep making it. And as long as people still connect with it and want the paintings and want to look at the artwork, I feel like that now, especially during these COVID times, having people buy artwork and allowing me to make a living as a painter and not a teacher has been game-changing, because I feel like it's grown my confidence to realize that this is where I really want to be.
You just have to put yourself out there.
Yeah. Trust fall. It's like a series of how many trust falls can you fit in?
Yeah, I mean, that's life. You're never going to be totally secure. You just got to trust in the process. And the more effort you put in, the more you show up. Results happen. The hard part is also understanding that you're always going to get out what you put in. It's just usually not what you expect. And it almost always takes longer than what you hope for.
Oh, yeah.
We see things like, I do this, and this should happen. And sometimes that even happens, but it's like, I do this, and 4 years later, this thing happens that I thought was going to happen
always
in 6
happens.
months.
Yeah. But the more I have grown to just trust that something's going to work out, the more I get mural projects, or I get, like, if you really are in the spot that I think you're in, your like true to your core where you should be, you just have to breathe through the stress of it all and realize that something will work. But to your point, I think where you aim your arrow, like if I'm aiming my arrow at, it's like teaching all the time, then I'm going to be a better teacher. But if that's not where my heart or my soul or my true purpose lies, then I'm doing these things over and over again and putting what I'm really vulnerable and open to on the back burner. So if you shift, which I think COVID made me shift, then I'm like, okay, well, if I aim at painting, I mean, like you said, if you do it more, you're going to be better at it. So
isn't it funny you just talk about how COVID, it's like there's always silver linings too.
I know.
Always, even in the most difficult and stressful situations where this has been tough. I mean, I produce events, you taught and did art, and now all of a sudden, like, I think our safety net just went out the window. But you also had time to focus on this. Like, you could just be in the studio. You weren't missing anything. Like, life actually created a space for you to explore this passion even deeper. And it's getting not caught up in the end product, not getting caught up in perfection, and really living by a little bit of a yes and. We'll see what this happens. And it's funny how those silver linings really could then help you define, or it helps you take a step you wouldn't have stepped. And all of a sudden you have a whole new direction. Yeah.
It's a push. Like, it's just, I think there's always, if you're willing to look at it, like, the universe will push you in a certain direction. And COVID for me was like, well, if this is where I'm going, then if I'm going to go out, if I'm not going to be able to do art anymore, then I'm going to go out as big and bad as I can, and I'm going to paint whatever I want and whatever style I want until I can't anymore.
Yeah, and like with that push, you may stumble. Yeah. But you could be stuck on the fact that you stumbled, or you could get up, push yourself off, take a deep breath, and then kind of follow the curve.
Yeah. I think that, like, saying that, I think that I would even argue that you are going to stumble. It's
yeah,
not
100%. You can't just shift and expect everything to be like, oh, this just works out. Because also then life would be boring, Sometimes these challenges are just space for you to grow.
Yeah. And then you need the other side of like a trip to a beach to let it all soak back in before you can do it again.
Well, yeah, then you have that moment where you overcome that obstacle, and it also creates this new sense of confidence that will push you in different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to also touch back. You painted and you also taught.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think teaching art, how did that help you develop as an artist?
I think number one, I grew in how important I believe all of the arts to be for all human beings. I think I grew in my ability to listen in teaching to the students and then ask the same questions of myself. So one, I think that the arts are extremely therapeutic, and I think I've already said, because I feel like I say this a lot, that it's not the end result, and there is value in that. Masterpieces are phenomenal, but I feel like the process going through it, like you were talking about the cycle of emotions that go through dance, that's really where there's so much value in that. And so I value that more in myself, but then when I ask kids questions, I love, and adults, I love seeing how other people see the world, because 9 times out of 10, it's completely different than the way I see the world, which grows my perspective immensely. So if I go and I teach a group of accountants how to paint, who knows, like some desert landscape or something like that, the way that they approach the canvas is not the way I do, but every single person in the room does it so differently that I feel like I've learned the importance of all of individuals, even in the same lesson. Also in making mistakes. I think that we somehow are afraid of making mistakes, and I don't really know exactly where that comes, but somehow around, like if I'm teaching a kindergarten art class, it's more of holding them back because they're so open to it that they are flooding the canvas with paint. There's paint everywhere, there's glitter everywhere, and they are just, and it's within 30 minutes of a time period. And then as slowly as you creep onto like 5th grade, 6th grade, then kids are looking around the room and they're more worried about what other people are doing, or did I do it right? So somehow, I think that 3rd, 4th grade range is one of my favorite, because they still have that abandon, this like, I'll just let it go. And then they're starting to being able to understand the visual world a little bit more too.
The skills starting to match up with the enthusiasm.
Yeah, but I love teaching and trying to get kids that maybe aren't great at something else, or math comes hard to them, or whatever things they can excel. Anyone can excel in art as long as they find the way that they make art.
So how have you developed that skill to push someone who might be hesitant?
How have I developed it? I start small. So one of the things, like I was talking about earlier, of when I'm creating my own artwork, I'll do the brain dump and just write with reckless abandon, anything that comes to mind. In order to teach that skill of kind of letting go and putting yourself into your artwork and owning it as part of you, I will do a series of like 20 questions, and I'll start, what's your favorite color? Who is someone that needs something to do? If you could go on vacation, and then layer in a few deeper questions. Does that answer the full question?
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing too I want to go back on, which I thought was a very important point, was the idea of the process and not the end result. And it's great to have a masterpiece, but I think for any artist, any writer, anybody getting in the creative field, you really have to love the process and not the end result. Because the thing about the end is, it's over. It's like you work so hard for that time when you could pop the champagne cork, but then you're back into the fear of the unknown. And I think the best part is really like 60 to 95. It's like you're past, you really have a sense of whatever it is you're creating, you're starting to get into a flow, and you know this world is so rich and it's so deep, and that's where you really can enjoy yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find that place where you enjoy it, because if you're just looking to the end, then you're going to be constantly in the beginning and the end, and those are actually the 2 toughest places to always be.
Yeah, that's what I write about. I was just writing my goals for 2021, and being present in the now it's definitely one of my goals, to make sure that I, one, feel the richness of each painting as I'm making it, maybe even journal about the process or share the process a little bit. And then I think the other part of that is celebrating. So if you celebrate, I I think we have a tendency to finish and then start back up again, where there are big things that happen along the way that I think need the space and time for us to own that.
Celebrate the moments to get there.
Yeah.
Don't fully spike the football, but enjoy that you're making progress in
Yeah.
whatever creative medium you're choosing to pursue. And then take a second to recap, to celebrate, and even analyze what you just did before you jump back into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Take that time to process so you let go and you have time to learn.
Absolutely.
Is there a lesson that really stood out? Because like they say, the best way to learn is to teach, that you taught somebody that reflected back to you.
That's a good question too.
Even before you talked about with the kids, you are convincing them they're an artist, and then you are like, well, I'm not an artist yet.
I know. It's like the interesting conundrum of, teaching definitely does put a mirror straight to your face. The thing I think that I feel like just change your mind. Like, don't beat yourself up. You can burn a canvas if you need to, paint over it if you need to. But the process of failure, I think, in my own work and in student work is something that I think I hold on to. That it's not bad. Like embrace the process, embrace the training, embrace whatever that part is where hopefully that's forever. I mean, the learning and the constant learner, I think, is really an important thing to stick with.
The path to success is paved in failure. Do you like painting smaller paintings versus big paintings?
No.
You have all these small behind you, and then you also have these huge canvases. What do you find easier?
It depends on the season. So, in general, I'm much more physical, so I love painting big, which is what I just did a huge studio sale to kind of release. So anything from 2018 or before, I sold at kind of crazy prices because I bought half a dozen 48 by 60 plus size canvases. So right now I'm craving really big, and I have the studio that I can do it in. In the past, I've only been able to do big in the summer because I can do it outside. But back to the learner, I feel like every small canvas is kind of a sketch. So if I'm still learning, like some of these behind me are relief, which we'll talk about, sculpted relief. So if I'm still in the deep dive learner, I want to do a lot of them, and I want to do smaller before. My dream for these is to do 48 huge waves and things in plaster, but plaster dries pretty quickly, and supplies are pretty expensive. So I prefer big, though I do appreciate being able to bring small canvases to the lake or to wherever I'm going, or small pieces in my studio.
So do you do a lot of plein air?
I do as much as I can, though it gets really frustrating when the paint blows around and the weather shifts in Montana. Most of the time I'll start things in the summertime outside, but if it's something realistic, then I'll take imagery and finish it in my studio.
Do you notice a difference in your creativity level, output, or ease summer versus winter?
I have, but this year is such a weird year, it's kind of shifted. So usually summertime is really high. I don't teach very much at all. So this summer didn't feel that abnormal, if I can get my words, because I usually have dedicated, especially in the last 5 or so years, to paint all summer long. Once school starts up, so usually, September, October, I'm doing a lot of adult classes. Winter time, I do a lot of sip and paint classes usually at different places around town, and then I'll do residencies, which is not happening at all this year. So this year being odd in a million ways is also talk about like blessings of the year too. My 3 goals are to create every day, to finish paintings, because somehow I have a hard time knowing when something's done or admitting when it's done, so finishing them and then putting them online, so making sure that people can see what I made and then I finish what I made. But having that as a dedicated effort daily has driven my studio. Like, I'm really excited to finish that lion painting today.
You have intention, and I know like
intention.
your paintings, you start with an intention, and that helps. You're working towards a goal, and you understand clearly what that goal is.
Mm-hmm.
When you have trouble finishing a painting, do you ever bring in outside people to look at it, or is it still just you and you make that final?
No, I bring in it. So my younger sister is a fisheries biologist, but she's super artistic. So I think I have sent every single painting I've ever done to her before I call it finished. Because she has an eye for it too. So she can, and she's very honest with me. So she'll say, that's great, but the nose is in the wrong spot or something like that, or this part looks weird. So I do have filters before.
How angry has that made you when your younger sister tells you something, or
honestly,
she's the right one to help? She's your right editor.
She's the one I can, I have a couple friends that I can do it with too. But it's never, and I think maybe that's just how our relationship is, that we can say hard things to each other and know that it's not about the person. It's just about, if I'm asking for advice.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, I have one older brother, and some things like 100 people would ask me the same thing, and then Adam asks it to me, and it's like,
yeah,
serious.
It might
and it's
be
like
art.
that, and it's just like the brother, but also it's you have an editor you trust.
Yeah.
I know in the writing world as an editor, I don't know if there's a special name in the art world, but sometimes you have that person who really is the person who helps give you the right advice to push it from 90 to 100, and you trust in the process, and you trust that person will get you where you want to go.
I do miss, that's the studio critiques of college. I miss that because it is nice. Though I trust Michelle, she knows my work pretty closely at this point, obviously, so it's nice in a studio environment. And maybe post-COVID we can have artists gather and really dive into different ideas.
To have fresh voices
Exactly.
and to help push you in a direction you wouldn't, or as someone who's intimately familiar with your work,
Mm-hmm.
they might kind of be following what this kind of look like this, or you're not quite there, while somebody new is coming in and been like, actually could go this whole different direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just takes me letting my ego.
Yeah, that's harder. You don't know.
Yeah.
You haven't seen my other work.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So you went from painting, so you primarily do acrylic?
Right now, I've been doing acrylic is usually what I do in the summertime, just because it's easier, and then I transition over to oil. But I'm really loving the liquid acrylics right now.
And then you also worked your way into relief. So let's grab one and let's talk a little bit about reliefs.
Okay, so you want one too? I can grab.
Sure.
Maybe I'll grab my fish. Okay, so there is an amazing woman. Her name is Bonnie, and she owns out of Colorado a business called Transforming Walls. Universe just threw this conference at me, and my aunt and I went down. She's a faux painter to Florida last November. Bonnie's work is really detailed and enormous, big, huge walls, but she's also such an amazing person that she wants each of us to kind of develop our own style. So she came to visit me this summer, and I talked a lot about how I love looking at water, being in water, painting water, and skies. So kind of clouds and storms and water are my two favorite things. And so she saw the fish here that I had done with this relief and said, this looks like something you might be interested in. So I started to do this big series of water. The process, though, is really interesting. So it is a mix of plaster and a few other things, and then you sketch something out in general, and then you build it up from the plaster, lots of layers. You can shave it down, sand it, carve into it, lots of different things, but you get this it's really hard to see unless you see it in real life, because it's extremely bumpy.
Well, looking at this, it looks like you'd have less flexibility to be able to play, and like your other paintings, you could easily just paint over, or you really develop it. Here, you actually have to make a structure that's 3D and comes out, so it seems less restrictive in that you have to have more of an idea of what you're trying to create.
Yes and no. Yes, it is it's great to have an idea. If I'm doing something more particular, like the Lone Peak back here and the bears, or the fish, really good to have a plan. But then, as with my painting, I feel like it has a life of its own sometimes. So it's essentially, it feels like frosting a cake, where you're moving this thing around and troweling it around and pulling it up in different areas. So it takes, but it might just be me doing it. It takes a life of its own, kind of moves in different tangents anyway.
Yeah, I guess it's like I just kind of see the end result, but the plaster is wet, so it's still a medium that you can just kind of carve and you play with.
Yeah.
And I like to build stuff out of clay, and I don't know whatever I'm going to do, but I kind of start making a shape, and then all of a sudden I see a shape. And I think you described this with like looking at the clouds, and from that one shape, all of a sudden I have an idea, and then I start tacking around it.
Yeah.
So is that you kind of like put some plaster on it, you kind of fooling around with it, and all of a sudden the shape, you have this center thing, and like, oh, got it, and you start building off of that?
Well, yeah, so it depends. So when I first, like these ones that I was doing, I'll grab, like little, like especially the bison here, these ones I definitely did a sketch. So pre-planned it out and then started to visualize what I wanted to be the closest thing to the viewer, what I wanted to recede. So a lot slower in planning on these ones. The water, because I had decided that my intention was flow and I just wanted to work on waves and water and current, that was kind of my only intention for that. So slightly different ways of coming at the same.
And then what kind of paint goes over the top?
I've been playing with that. So acrylic paint, I try to get, the darker blue, like a turquoise acrylic with a little Payne's gray or something like that, and then I wipe it off so it stays recessed, and then let it dry, and then give a little bit of, I think it's pearl that's on the top of the waves, because I wanted to read, more as a sculpture, but I have been playing with color on them.
How much harder is it to paint something that's not flat?
Way harder, way harder. Let me grab one of these guys.
I imagine that creates some frustrations, but at the same time, it probably creates something cool you may not have expected. Or it's easier to understand how the paint's going to react on a flat surface than with a crevice or a shadow.
And it's never smooth and neat. So like this, if you can see, is a painted bas relief or a sculpted relief. But there's some part of me that feels like the paint takes away. The best part of being a learner is I feel very comfortable playing with the relief and seeing what happens next.
Do you have a less sense of a pressure on this because it's a new medium as compared to painting where you've been doing it for years and years?
Yeah, I've been doing that for so long that I feel like I know in general if it's good or if it's really bad, somewhere in the middle. But Bonnie's fantastic. So Bonnie is my filter for this. So I take pictures of my relief and send it to her, and she gives me an honest, informative, try this, do this, which I guess is why the small is so good for these ones, because it's just easier to do it fast and learn.
This kind of goes back again that your creative process is kind of like how you approach paintings in general. You just let it develop. And I think that's a really important lesson for artists who've been painting or doing anything for a long time. Try something else. Try a different medium and see how you have that release of expectations. Mm-hmm. It's easier. Steve Jobs talked about this in his famous commencement speech in Stanford, where after he got fired from Apple, he had a lightness because he no longer was in charge, but to be a beginner. And even you, now you're painting and you're getting to experiment with paint again, in a whole new medium might help you unlock something that could translate back into your preferred and traditional medium.
Yeah, or they'll combine. I mean, that's the greatest, not knowing and being a beginner in that, I think is a really sweet spot to be, because it's a big doorway with a question mark over it. Who knows what happens?
You get the lightness of being a beginner again.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of these paintings, with your relief, your bigger ones, where could people find you online?
AllisonMcGree.com. But I have, so if you go AllisonMcGreeFineArt.com, AllisonMcGree.com, McGree Art Gallery, all of them link back to the same site.
And besides just painting, you have something unique on your website that you're selling right now.
Oh, so I have art kits. So if anybody is doing an online art class, I have little kits of everything you'd need, including all the paints, a palette, brushes, and all of that. And then I have a whole section of art gear too. So this year is the first year I've really kind of dialed in. I have I have 4 or 5 different kinds of prints, all different sizes. I have notebooks, I have note cards, I have more art gear than you really need. So.
Yeah, and I think this will be our last topic we get into. You and I talked before about the importance of a great website. So when I was looking at your website to do some research before this, I was really impressed. And I think you have one of the best websites I've seen of any of the artists in Bozeman. So I want you to talk for a second about what made you step up and decide that you really want to have a great website and how this has helped you as an artist.
That is, okay, so the reason I stepped up, I've done it in little steps. This last April was the biggest little step, just because I knew I needed to put all of my effort into creating art, making it so people could buy from my website easily, and that people knew what I was doing and where to find me. So that was a huge push to have that done by November, just to make sure that all of the holiday seasons worked in my favor, that people could find me during that time. In addition to that, I think one part that we talked about a little bit is that you've got to ask for help and invest in yourself. So I did not do this website entirely by myself. Tessa at Lightbox Business did this. I did a lot of research on my site is a Shopify site, but how can I take to social media? How do I make it the easiest possible way for somebody to find my work or to see my work and then be able to buy right away? So a lot of different things coupled into that, but one, just making the intention that, if I'm going to make a living as an artist, I need to make my art into a business that's really has ease for the general public, and then hiring someone.
Yeah, and it's like those two things. Make sure that it's easy in its function, so if people sign on to buy something, that it's not a hard process, because people may go with intention, but if they find frustration, you might lose that sale in 25th hour. And two, if you're an artist, you need it to look visually good, because your life is about selling an image. It's like visual images, and don't underestimate the importance of that. But I think some people may struggle with being afraid to fully put themselves out there.
Absolutely.
So one thing that you did was you really helped organize your website and make it easy. And I think all those little steps help you overcome any hesitation that you are worth doing all this effort that you could show off.
Yeah, hire a professional photographer. I have a Speed Coaching and Creative does all of my process pictures, which I do at least once a year now, which is a game changer, because as a visual artist, people want to know your story. And they want to see your story, and they want you, and you kind of have to lean into it. Might not be the most comfortable thing. I do not like posting videos of myself painting because it's terrifying, but it's really nice for people to see, oh, that's how she does it. Because it shouldn't be like the Great Wizard of Oz or whatever, a hidden thing. So hiring Blair at Speed Coaching Creative, getting Tessa to work on my website, and then, making sure it's organized and asking for help with the organization, and making sure that when people go, they know exactly who you are and what you do, based on also getting either write something beautiful yourself or have someone help you write something, because that's one of the worst things if it's rambling and there's spelling errors and then the pictures are sized differently. I mean, it reads as unprofessional.
Yeah, and it's like it might be uncomfortable, as you just said, to be painting in front of people or to a video, but it's that steps of uncomfortableness that's going to separate the people who are going to give up and the people who are going to take that step forward.
Yeah, if you're going to, you just have to embrace it. It is, if this is the life that you choose, people want to know what the story is behind it. And it's really fun after doing it for a bit and kind of loosening into the terror of it all. It's fun for people to ask questions, because it's like your hidden little room, right? So nobody knows that you write on a canvas and then paint and throw paint to the canvas in whatever way and you want to, and then add something to it, unless you tell them. And we all do things so differently. That's why it's so cool that you're doing this, because I feel like it's really fun to uncover what other people do that makes them who they are as an artist.
Yeah, and even goes back to what we talked about earlier, of not just being the end result. You're not just a picture, you're a whole story. And somebody has your art, and if somebody comes over and looks at it, they could talk about the interaction they had with you and the story that led them to actually purchase the painting, instead of just seeing something they thought was pretty. It's so much more of a story and even part of their life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So is there any last thing that you want to cover, any last lesson that you want to share?
Just be afraid and do it anyway.
Great advice, not only art, but all of life. Allison, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time. We really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye.